So AI, you can imagine that at a water data conference, that this is something where we could quickly delve into different kinds of large language models, generative AI, things of that nature, but that's actually not the intent of today's panel. The intent of today's panel is really to talk about the impact of AI, or what AI means as a role at your utility or your consulting firm, and also what that means in terms of where we need to be realistic about data needs and what we can actually realistically do with those things today. So I think it's also important to set the scene, and Chris alluded to that a bit, that there was an executive order that was issued yesterday that I would like to read a little bit of the summary from. So published September 6, 2023, Governor Newsom signs executive order to prepare California for the progress of artificial intelligence. What you need to know: California is the global hub for generative artificial intelligence. We are the natural leader in this emerging field of technology, tools that could very well change the world, to capture its benefits for the good of society, but also to protect against its potential harms. Governor Newsom issued an executive order today laying out how California's measured approach will focus on shaping the future of ethical, transparent, and trustworthy AI while remaining the world's AI leader. So if we were talking about having a timely conversation, really we got a note from not too far away in the Capitol that is absolutely the case. One other point that I'll add from that is that an output from that is that there's really looking for a partnership with academia. Two institutes in particular were named, one of which was Cal Berkeley, and the other was Stanford. And so, of course, I'm sure there's going to be some pretty bitter rivalry as those things come out. But really, you are sitting literally in the right time at the right place to be having a conversation about how we're going to look at AI as something, one, that we really are going to be able to leverage today, and then also what realistically you're going to need to think about in the next 5 years when you're looking at your strategic plans. How are you going to resource for this? And so my name is Jonathan Cruz. I'm the Director of Financial Planning and Innovation at Moulton Niguel Water District. And I happen to have an incredible panel that we could easily turn this into a 3 or 4 hour session, but I promise we'll keep things succinct. And so with that, I'll turn it over to my panelists to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for having me here. I'm Woodman. I'm the CEO of DataKind. DataKind is a nonprofit that works across civil society writ large, government institutions, nonprofits, academia, to bring data science and AI to that population for greater social impact.
And tomorrow's keynote.
Hi, I'm Jeanna Long. I'm with Woodard and Curran. I'm our National Digital Innovation Leader for the firm. So that means I really drive innovation in the digital and data science area. We're a consulting firm. We work with lots of you and the state and other agencies across the company or the country to implement various digital tools and data science solutions. Thank you.
And I think I'm talking about key takeaways now. My name is Dave Lynch. I'm a CEO of a company called Klir, and we are a regulatory compliance software and sustainability software exclusively for the water industry. So our hypothesis has been since we started that AI is coming, but compliance, regulation, data, the conversations around that is the digital or maybe digital water cooler where we all talk about how we manage water better. So this year we launched our generative AI bot, and our idea is not to launch it and release it into the wild. It's our idea is to collaborate and build this with the water industry. Many of our customers dot around the US and Asia Pacific and North America, are helping us refine and tune this model. So I'm really excited to be able to talk about what we've observed in this very early infancy of AI so far.
Thank you. Right, so you've already heard, I think, each of the panelists say collaboration, partnerships. This is something that is foundational to the California Data Collaborative. And so again, I'm very happy to have all of you here. Really, this is a time that we're able to take things that were traditional data science in just a few years past and really just turn the dial up to 11. And so I wanted to start off by sharing a story where at Moulton Niguel, where we actually partnered through a partnership very much similar to what we're looking at today with the California Data Collaborative, with data scientists through DataKind, to look at something that was really very new, which was taking our recycled water AMI data and using it to develop a demand forecast to evaluate if we should pursue a particular storage project. We thought it was a common sense idea, and so wanting to make sure that we're looking at all of those particular data points when we're making this kind of large capital investment, that we went through, ran this analysis, and then ended up finding that for us, it just didn't really make sense. And so right away, we started realizing the value of data science. And from there, really went full bore with AMI. And we find ourselves today at a point where when I started at the district, that we had 6 points of data on customers in a year because they were bi-monthly billing. We are now at a point where we have 24 points of data in a day. So just to put that in perspective, even for our agency of just 55,000 connections, we have over 430 million water usage observations every year. So quick poll of the audience, who knows how many rows Excel can actually open? I'm sure there are a couple people in here that do know that, but it's actually only 1.6 million. So that right away is going to tell you that you cannot use the methods that were being used 10, 15 years ago to actually do the kind of work that you're able to do on these gigantic data sets. And so with that, one of the first things that I wanted to task the panel with was seeing, what are you seeing now? What are the really kind of exciting things that get you going? And where do you see this kind of taking off in the future? And so I'll just go by proximity. So Lauren, I'll turn it over to you first.
Thank you. I think one of the things that is most exciting to me about sort of where we are with data science and AI, and this is going to sound, sort of meta, is data science and AI are really exciting. And lots of people now, I think, are sort of grasping that. And so where I think, too often in the past, we have used data as a means, relatively limited data sets or data to validate decisions. This shift of data into decision making, and we've all been talking about data-driven decision making for some time, but with data science and generative AI being so accessible, our ability to use our own data, to use historical data, to use public data, to combine that for much more contextualized decision making is really fascinating to me. And the fact that we're now having those conversations outside of the server room where, the dorky IT folks like me and the data scientists are all hanging out, being excited by the blinking lights, that's not where the conversation's happening. The conversation is happening at the senior leadership level, at the board of directors level, at the GM level, because it is so critical to our sort of long-term planning. And I think that that's, really important to help us not only make sure that our respective agencies and organizations are making good decisions, but also that we are collecting the right kind of data. We're thinking in the future, and we're really thinking about the types of non-technical things that are necessary in order to make these technologies really come to their full potential.
Going on down the line.
Yeah. So actually, to build on that idea, I think what we're seeing is just there's such a huge focus now on like return on investment. How much are you investing? What are you seeing for those investments? And are you making equitable decisions in those investments? And AI is allowing us to actually implement that type of analysis now. For example, there's this one project we have with the state where we're looking at, tracking resiliency and tracking sustainability, and you have all these actions, all these projects that you're implementing, and all this money that you're investing across the state, across different types of water sectors. How do you take that and figure out, is that project doing what it said it was going to do? How is that benefiting our system? And you have all these projects that get submitted, right? It's like documents and not really in a database or anything like that. The only way we could really pull all that information out to see statewide what are these projects doing is to use AI and to be able to pull out that relevant information and then align it with goals and targets, and then be able to take that and look at how the systems are responding and tracking that over time. So I think without AI and data science, we really wouldn't be at a place where we can start tracking, these investments and responses and seeing how, whether we're doing a good job on that.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe in a slightly sort of different tangent or a different approach from where we're seeing it. I like to think that what's happened over the last year or two with the development of things like ChatGPT and these generative AI models, it is a transformational leap. Like it is different than what has come before, and that's evolutionary. Like that's pretty natural. And I think I like to think, or maybe the question posed, like, what does the future look like in a water utility? In this world, and I think forward to or maybe even look back a little bit. Water has always been about a conversation. That's what I think about water management from thousands of years ago. It's about a conversation. It's about multiple people from multiple different disciplines coming together to ask questions and decide what's the best use, or how do we make our water safe and secure. And so with the advent of these generative AI models, is that conversation can now continue in respect of water. And in that integrated one water approach, these conversations, you're able to have these now with these models. Like this is not something that is limited to these data scientists on a particular floor of your building. And I think the key here is it is an opportunity. This is coming whether we like it or not. On my team, I know we do these voiceovers. So they've taken samples from my Zoom recording where now all the voiceovers are done without me even speaking. So this is just, these tools are available whether we like it or not. So what are the impacts on our utility? Will someone pretend to be the general manager, ringing up telling you to do something? How are we going to train our staff to deal with those type of things? But overall, I think it is an opportunity. And one of the quotes from the release today was, I was trying to pull it up, the governor said we shouldn't be frozen by fear or hypnotized by opportunity. And I love that. I think like that is in essence the water industry. Like the water industry isn't a group that jumps into the shiniest piece of technology that came out every single day. But it does have to be quite adaptive. And we've seen in the morning panels this morning is that we can't just rely on the last 100 years of data. We have to think of innovative and new ways. So this is an incredible opportunity that an industry like water can contribute to the wider discussion on what is a role AI plays, and really actively contribute to generating these models for the future.
So I know as the topic of AI, large language models, comes up in just TV, let's say, a lot of what you hear about is humans being replaced or bias in these data sets. And I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind, is that these particular platforms, they'll give you an answer. I'm sure a good majority of the people in the room here have tried to put something into ChatGPT and get a really silly response. It didn't give you a value score on what that response was. And this is the area where we can't forget about the importance of the human in all of this. And I think that's also really important as it relates to the water sector, because we don't necessarily have all of these data sets in the formats that are easily consumable by these bots. And so that question in particular, I thought was really interesting when we discussed in our pre-meeting for this, because it just came up naturally. It's that we can't forget about the human component. And so I wanted to throw that back to the group as it relates to the data readiness and things of that nature, and how much that's going to play a part in what we're looking at. Anyone can go first this time.
I was gonna say, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, so kind of going back to my previous point where, we're trying to make good decisions and, determine whether or not the programs, the conservation programs that you all are implementing are actually doing what they say they're going to do. Are you seeing water savings, things like that. I think right now, a lot of times it's a guessing game. And so I think in order to see that big picture, we need to start, better managing just the program information, tracking applications, things like that. And some of what we're doing for like ACWD and Eastern Municipal Water District are implementing really comprehensive program management tools that allow the agencies to, track applications. So collect more detailed information and manage that information in a way that it's going to be usable to the agency later on. A lot of times this information's sitting in Excel somewhere or a PDF document. There's lots of tools now that we can utilize to pull that information out, but it's great to start tracking it, from the get-go. So then also, taking that information, you're able to start tying it to your properties and your owners and your accounts, and managing that workflow, through the review process and whole life cycle of implementation of these programs. Ultimately, that allows you to then start reporting, rolling up on participation and tracking your estimated savings and investments and all the financial aspects of it. But then once you have all this data available on your programs that you're managing and implementing, you can also then start connecting to the actual usage data, pulling that in and starting to look at whether or not your programs are doing what they say they're going to be doing, and then allowing you to project, future savings into the future and make better decisions about the programs that you're implementing, more equitable, decisions, and really tailoring it, to your customers so that you're going to see the results that you want to. But it starts with starting to better manage that information and that data from the beginning.
David, do you want to go?
Yeah, I'd add, I'd just completely reinforce that, AI is the shiny thing, but if we're still managing, what we talk to a lot of water professionals, it's where I spent my entire career, and AI is the shiny thing. But if we're still managing our day-to-day operations on Post-it notes or in 9 different Excels that, Joe retired and he took the password with them, and we're trying to figure out. I know the laughs are there because that legitimately happened because I hear these stories every day. But there is a tempering that we need to talk about when we think about AI, and using these generic models and just slapping them into water is it actually get borders on dangerous. We need to release these into not the wild, but we need to use them in a measured way. So it needs to be applicable and trained within the context of water. Like I'll give an example. So I don't purport, I'm an engineer, so I don't purport to be an esteemed data scientist, but we have to understand where these models came from. So if we look at, let's say, one of the, like, stable diffusion model, or some of the models that have been built on, like, has some vision, that was trained on images from the adult industry. So when you start trying to use these models, say, okay, generate a picture of me on the beach, like they are inclined more to be that, like, a little bit more, let's just call it inappropriate. So they need to be trained. They need to be refined for the context that they're being used in. And I think, like, that's the incredible opportunity that we have with water, is that yes, these tools are now readily available. We can tweak them, we can fine tune them, we can make them useful for the context, but they're not just ready to be released into the wild yet.
So I want to pick up on that point, because I think it's an excellent point, in the sense that, the generative AI tools that are out there are built on large language models, which are built on foundational models, which are came out of being trained on an enormous amount of data that was essentially pulled from the internet and lots of other different places, that is very unstructured, unlabeled, and it is unknown what the relationship and context of that data that's put into those models are. I mean, that's fascinating, right? And then we go through the process of learning and training and all of those kinds of things, and the models, sort of figure out what the relationships between these things are, make some guesses, and refine over time. But the difference between me asking somebody who really understands water, Joe, who retired, who took the password with him, and could have told you in 32 seconds what the water usage was on a particular meter because he'd been doing it for 35 years. Joe knows that answer because Joe's worked in that context for a very long time. I could ask somebody who's really wicked smart and knows a whole lot of stuff, and he might have a pretty good guess as to what that meter might read, but he's not going to know like Joe does. And that's kind of the delta between these, these models that were created for, general use. And I don't know anybody who, would run their business on good general data, right? You really want people running their operations, especially for something that is so critical to economic well-being and the health of families and all of those kinds of things. You want to run your water systems using water relevant data. And I think that that's really important as we think about, these models are incredibly exciting. They're going to be absolutely transformational, and they're going to absolutely revolutionize the way that we think about things. I 20 years from now, we're going to look back and we're going to name these few years, right? Like, there's going to be a name for this, and we say that's when it happened, because I think they're that transformative. I also think that they're not the answer to everything. They're just not the answer to everything, and we are still relatively early. I think it speaks to the human question that you bring up, because there's all this conversation about what's going to happen to jobs. And what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to learn to live with these models. And how do we, and not learn to live with them, but learn to tap into them and extract from them and make our jobs easier and automate and get greater insights. And so there's all these questions from a strategic level around how do we invest in the right data? How do we set up the right ethics and equity frameworks that we want to use this data for? And then how do we train people to know how to use these tools in the context that in which we work, and how we use that to drive our own objectives forward, so that, you know, water is available for the whole state, water is available for our district, and to your point, that the programs that we're trying to implement and do are actually having the impact that we want them to have. So that it's super exciting. I think, you know, I'm obviously optimistic about where we're going, but I do think that human component in there, you know, is one of a little bit of a tempering of, you know, let's not get too crazy. You know, Joe still knows a whole lot, including the password. And, you know, how do we make sure that everybody is, you know, we're approaching this in the right way so that we can tap into what we now have available to us.
I still just really love that Joe has the password one, because that
literally all the river water biological data in Ireland for 35 years was on this guy's desktop computer with the password, and he went on this end of retirement, like 6-week trip, and no one could get access to it. So I say we have dozens of these stories. It's so true.
I kind of love that though.
Yeah, I sort of do.
Well, it does bring up the point though too, that a spreadsheet, something with a password that presumably somebody somewhere could open and then everyone has access to. Another important part of that is the fact that that information and that knowledge, or the knowledge that comes from having that information and that data, that the knowledge aspect is also something that needs to get passed on. And so I think that's another part of the resourcing, is that if we think AI is going to come solve all our problems, well, it's going to be a helpful tool to help you solve problems, or help you solve problems faster or with more information. But there's always going to be a need for somebody who understands how a meter functions. Like, that doesn't go away. And I think that's the part that really is critical in all of this discussion about how we're using these tools to do everything we couldn't do before. That's absolutely true. That's to me, augmented human, not a replaced one. But I really do like the concept of, we let machines do machine work so that humans can do the human work. Because that's really what I'm wanting from somebody. If we're thinking about an evolving workforce and worried about somebody's skills going, or them not having a job, you know, we didn't have tractors at the turn of the 19th century, really, right? It was later on that we see this huge boom of new technologies that are taking away jobs. But we also didn't have computer programmers at the time. So the new jobs come and jobs evolve. We actually have more people having more jobs now than we did prior to these innovations. And so again, the human component of it is also an investment. How do you make sure that somebody is understanding that they themselves are investing in this, that they're being trained to be able to interact with these things, and that it's not because I want to see this person's job replaced. It's because I want to see that person be better utilized. And especially when looking at strategic planning or long-term planning, I think it's really important to keep in mind the idea of the human capital that's there. And along those lines, there was another quote that came up from our background discussion about, you wouldn't just let your kid go drive without any guardrails, right? It's could they drive a car? Yes. Should they drive a car? Maybe. Should they drive a car right this second? I wouldn't want to be on the road with them. So again, it really is something where, as skills evolve, or as a job evolves and technology evolves, the way we look at our workforce also has to evolve with that. So I don't know if anyone on the panel wants to jump in on that too.
Yeah, I'd love to jump into this, because I think this is the crux of the opportunity that's in water. You know, we have to face reality. We have a workforce issue. We have a workforce challenge here. This isn't a steady state system where, okay, you know, what happened for the last 40 years, we're just going to do that in year 41, year 42, year 43. It is a different challenge tomorrow than what we faced yesterday. And if you, like, there's so many aspects of this, but if you look at the water industry, and we were just talking about this at lunch, that, you know, the experience in water is like this bimodal distribution where we have a lot of, you know, 0 to 5, 0 to 6 year experience, and then 25 plus. So how do you bridge that gap? How do you take this knowledge that's about to walk out the door, You know, it could be up to 90% in some of our customers, 90% of their staff is eligible for retirement soon. How do you institutionalize that knowledge? How do you make sure that this isn't, this decision-making isn't going to walk out the door? Because, you know, these cycles, this summer, winter cycles, you don't go through all of these events in the couple of years that you're training teams up. So this is the opportunity where generative AI and these type of tools can come in, because ultimately, and what I get really excited about is, imagine being able to have a conversation with everyone who ever worked at your agency or everyone who ever worked in the water industry. And you're having a conversation with them all at once, but it's not like at a bar where you're all shouting over each other. It is, you know, iteratively getting better, you know, incorporating the data of, were these decisions, did they have a real world and a better impact or the desired impact? And that you're able to query these in a natural language thing. I just think that's the most incredible opportunity, and specifically given the acute nature of water, I think this is where we as an industry need to jump in with both feet. But to your point, like, we can't just hook up, you know, our water systems to Skynet, not to be too dystopian, but, you know, I think we need to train these, and, you know, they need to go through driver's ed. They need to be a year on the road, and then they're allowed to maybe take a drink and drive or whatever it may be. We have to train them, you know.
A drink of water, right?
A drink of water, yeah, exactly, yeah. No alcohol here.
Any other panelists?
Yeah, I don't know how to follow that.
No, I was going to say, I mean, I did bring up, you know, during some of our previous discussions, an example of this where it's interesting. I think a lot of the applications we're seeing for machine learning and AI are to sort of augment that workforce where you have somebody who's going to be leaving. We have a case where we're doing a pilot project for a large facility in Florida where this person is going to retire in 5 years. They want out. And there's nobody who understands that system the way he does. He knows exactly what water levels are going to look like if you pump this much water over here versus here. And it's a 2,000 acre, you know, area that you're trying to cover. So in those cases, you're actually able to sort of use that knowledge to build a model to help with the decision-making for, you know, the staff that are still going to be there monitoring the system. So it's interesting.
And it's really fascinating to think about how you take the different places in which that knowledge and data are stored. And one of the places where AI is going to make this a lot easier is getting all of that data into a mechanism that is then accessible. Because, you know, some of it's in email, some of it's in PDF, some of it's in a manual, you know, an operations manual somewhere, and you can feed all of that stuff in and then say, okay, now we have a model that gives us a sense as to what that knowledge is, you know, that you can lean into and refine over time. That's one of those places where I think it's just going to be very interesting to start unlocking data and unlocking knowledge that, you know, right now it just isn't accessible.
I think the other key, or the one general manager and one of the bigger water utilities here in the US said to me, this isn't about, you know, maybe traditionally the water operator was there to say, you need to push this button every hour, you know, every day. And we're elevating that workforce to say, should we push that button? When should we push that button? Why? How hard? How often? You know, we're actually elevating the workforce. So I think to your point, it's really important that this isn't about mass layoffs. This is about elevating the collective knowledge of water to actually solve these really, really challenging problems tomorrow.
So with that, there was another comment that came up in our prior discussions about, and we'll get to it a little bit further too, but start now. Like what data sets can we put together? What kinds of questions do we want to ask? What kind of questions can we ask? And so just to share a story, when I first started at Moulton, Niguel, we were one of the agencies that had water budget-based rates. And one of the questions that we asked ourselves was that a good policy? Well, I could tell you our water usage went down. But really what it was born from was that back in one of the earlier droughts, there were watering day restrictions. And so those watering day restrictions, as they came up, we had customers that would simply water more on the day that they were allowed to. And had water cops that would go and write tickets to those that were watering on the wrong days. So there was now a program to administer that no one really liked. We didn't get any water savings. And so really there's this lose aspect to how we were being told to operate as a district. And our board at the time made the decision that really our customers are the ones who know really how best to use water at their house. Who am I to tell you Tuesday versus Wednesday? As long as you're being efficient. And so that was one of the reasons for going to water budget-based rates. Makes sense conceptually. Very difficult to implement as it relates to the amount of data points that you had to capture to be able to have a rate structure such as that. But then as I started the district, as we're coming out of another drought, we really wanted to ask the question of, did that in fact work? And so as one of my first tasks, and this is back when I was much more of a data analyst than a data advocate that I am now, the teams that work for me get to do all this cool kind of stuff. But back then, I was able to go and pull in historical usage data going back 10 years prior to when the budget-based rate structure was implemented. I paired that alongside the prices regimes that were there, rebate program participation, and basically everything that I could pull out from any other set that related to people interacting or receiving some kind of signal about how much water they're using, how much it's costing, them taking an action as a result of that. And I put it all together. And actually, we were working with UCR at the time, which is my alma mater. And so it was great that professors who were teaching me how to do this stuff I was working with them doing the stuff. And they were kind enough to actually do a calculation of the number of cells of all the different fields that were there. And it was 75 million data points. Turning that over, we were able to do a very robust economic analysis of the folks that were there before water budget-based rates and what happened to them after. And the customers that were already efficient stayed efficient. The customers, and nothing happened to them, right? They were already efficient. The customers who were inefficient became efficient. So now all of a sudden we're able to look at what was a policy decision and know that it did in fact have the intended consequence by leveraging all of the different data points that we had. We also were able to do rebate program participation analysis, a lot of the other things that Jeanna brought up, and that all had to do with, let me just put this data all in one format. And so I want to turn it back to the group and see really just kind of where you think it'd be an interesting pairing of different data sets as it relates to water. So water usage and something.
So we're in the process right now, actually, of looking at, and this is a little extracted from sort of municipal water systems and sort of looking at large water, sort of water ecosystems writ large. But one of the big questions that's come up is, and that we are excited about, is the intersectionality of data. And so we started looking at climate and finance. And, there's a lot of conversations around climate finance solutions. No one can actually define what a climate finance solution is, because if I have a rebate program that is to put, I don't know, solar on my house, is that a climate finance, or is that just smart consumer behavior? I don't know how you look at that. But data science will help us sort of pull some of those things out. And what's interesting about that is you could start to look at the intersectionality of, if we are exposing information to consumers, do they generally take the behaviors that we want them to take? And what are the incentives that got some consumers to become more efficient or less efficient? And so I think there's a lot of interesting places to do that. And I think as we continue to think about sort of managing water and the intersectionality with, economic opportunity and development and growth and all of those kinds of things, that combination of things and figuring out what are the right incentives to get to the outcomes that we want is an area where there is particular interest. For us right now, we're just particularly looking at climate and finance, and particularly within water and finance, and sort of seeing what it's going to tell us.
Well, you said a lot of what I would say. I think it goes back to looking at, what types of programs, tracking the program data, the implementation with the water usage, and being able to also overlay that with the demographic information, the equity information, looking at different, Calvin-Virus screen type data, just starting to overlay that to see how can we best tailor our marketing approaches? How can we do our outreach, better, and being able to sort of track that over time, and then also using AI to, potentially project into the future to see, are these programs going to be valuable? Are you going to be able to see the return on investment in what you're doing?
Yeah, I would what more to say? I would add, maybe my experience just working with customers is there's an element when we talk about intersection, but to get to hygiene first. I think what we've noticed is if you look at the iteration, there was, a lot of Excel sheets, and we sort of laugh, well, there's numbers of Excel sheets that are sitting around. But what's changed now in the last 5 or 10 years is there's now an app for this and an app for that. So the Excel sheets are now, an app is the new Excel sheet. So you're looking at like IT departments in water industries that have like 150 different, software solutions dotted around their organization. Someone, did this master's, they did a project, and they developed an Access database that sits in that, someone owns that, but they've retired and that doesn't really work anymore. And then someone bought another thing over here and another thing over there. Like all underpinning all of that is the quantity of data that's being generated globally, but just specifically in water. So if we don't get the hygiene right, and we don't sort of maybe try and not have as many apps for this and apps for that, and start having bespoke systems that are already baked in together that talk to each other, then otherwise we're going to spend the next 15 years just cleaning data for the advent of AI that might come in the future. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to spend 10 years sanitizing water data to try and figure out if we can, what intersectionality we can get at this. So I think what I would say is that we need to start thinking about very specific platforms that are applicable to water, and not just getting one more system and another system that we then try and subsequently interface with each other, because ultimately they're at the top of this entire pyramid is what we're all here to do, which is the safe and secure delivery of water services, or whatever derivation that is. But everything comes down from that. Everything stems down from that. So that's the way our data strategy should be as well, and that's the way our knowledge strategy should be as well.
I think that's really important to note that while the way we provide service has changed, the mission of providing service has not. That has been constant. The waters of Claudius have stood for 3,000 years, and they're still delivering water. But the way that we do that now has changed very much. And what has been relatively constant from it is the physical structures that we use, right? The waters of Claudius being a canal that brings water. Canals that bring water have been around forever. Now they look like pipelines, and now they're but still fundamentally they're about the same. I think we're also at a point where we ought to start looking at digital pipelines and digital infrastructure, and include that in our capital planning the same way that we do with planning for physical infrastructure.
Yes, 100%. No, I mean, I think that's absolutely important. And, I spent, a good portion of my career working in the humanitarian space, right? And you want to talk about a sector that has zero money to do anything, it's humanitarians. And even in years where humanitarians get funding, they will still tell you that they have no money because the need is so high. I think it's true. My point is that, you have getting to a point where you are using technology well, whatever it is, requires starting. And, it's not, we can wait 15 years and clean data and then be like, that's where we're going to start. It's going to be the data that you've now cleaned has been, automatically cleaned by somebody else, 8 years prior, and you're still 15 years behind. Or, you're still lagging in this place and ahead in this place. So, I don't think it is one of those things where you can say, what we're going to do. In 3 years, we're going to buy whatever the latest and greatest is, and then we'll be caught up and we'll be great, and we'll just call that good. It's just not the way technology works. It's not the way, training our workforces work. It's not the way that evolving our business operations work. So, everybody in this room has data. Everybody in this room has some way to analyze data right now. And then I would start asking questions. What are the things that I need to know in 2 years? What are the things that I need to know right now that I don't know? How would I get that information now? Who else do I have to talk to around figuring out whether or not that data would tell me what I want it to tell me, and who's impacted by that data? And you just kind of have to get on the treadmill and sort of start working through it, because it's all great in theory. It's all great, and you can read all the press releases and the hype, and it all sounds fantastic, and you'll be like, great, I'll check, I'll just take one of those. That's not really how it works, because it's the contextualization and the utilization inside an organization that makes technology and data useful. And so you just got to start that process and start, making progress towards that ultimate goal.
Yeah, and to build from that, I think you touched on this, it's super important, I think, that you have that subject matter expertise in this process. You have to identify what questions you want to answer and what data you have available, and start, processing the data, cleaning it, doing everything you need to do. But it really takes that subject matter expertise to pull it all together and make it useful and develop the models, develop, whatever digital technology you're trying to do. I've seen it over and over again just within the last year. There's an AI company, they're going to come in and they're going to implement this tool. It's going to be great. And, and you just throw data at it and it's going to answer all your questions. Doesn't work at all. And it's very frustrating, very time consuming for everybody involved. So I think it's important to remember, a lot of you are the experts in this, and you're going to have teams that are experts and rely on that expertise in order to implement a lot of these tools and make sense of it.
Yeah, such a good point. Like, I think what we've noticed when you hear about AI, and everyone here coming along to an audience like this is saying, is this, you're sitting in your seats and you're being sold AI tools every day. And you're like, okay, I've got loads of solutions. Let me go off and find the problem that I'm supposed to solve, And AI is the solution, and does the problem actually exist? And I think, what you talked about there is that the job is fundamentally the same. And I think, we really scratch that surface of, we are here, even though it's been the same job for the last couple of thousand years, to deliver the safe and secure water services. What are the challenges we face? And, I think about a general manager or a member of a board of water, and they want to ask a question. Hey, I got this question from a concerned citizen or a concerned customer saying, is this water safe? They don't want to hear that, well, Joe is out this week and we couldn't, that his part of the data we need to get over here, and then we'll put that together with this data over here later. They're not going to be ready for that, or they're not going to accept that as an answer. And we talk a lot that we need to have our customers more engaged in water conservation efforts. But what happens when we open that Pandora's box and we equip it with the generative AI tool where they can sound like they know exactly what they're talking about? So imagine the world where you're being inundated as an agency with now an engaged customer base, questioning everything you do about your water. You need to have those tools on the other side of it, that data clean, ready for use, to say, yes, your water is safe and secure today. I can answer that question using a generative AI tool, rather than waiting 4 weeks, 4 months, 4 years to say, yes, I've got back to your query and I can come back to it. So I think about the problem that a lot of leadership in water faces is, can I answer these questions? Can I answer this question when a concerned citizen comes to me? And that's what keeps a lot of people up at night.
So with that, we've got a little over 10 minutes left, and we did want to save some time for Q&A. So I want to turn it back to the panel again and ask, really, what's your one key takeaway that you want the audience to take away with them? Any order.
I would say, I don't think the tools are not something to be afraid of. I think it's something that we need to start building, and everybody needs to start building into how you do your work. I try to mentor a lot of junior staff, not to get pigeonholed into one, approach, the tried and true way you've always done things. Step outside of the box and think about other ways that you can do it, and think about other tools, especially around AI, that can help you do your job more efficiently, better, so you can spend your time a little better. The other thing is that I think all of these elements that we're talking about, the data processing and collection and all of that, really needs to be, a policy decision, and, made, I think, more important in terms of your thought process for implementing your policies at your agencies.
So I think a key takeaway is that, we said it a lot, AI is coming. I think another element about this is, I said it when we were doing our prep, is, you're not going to buy one box of AI. That's not the way AI is going to come. It's not going to be one vendor saying, here's your AI. It's not where, that was what it was like a little bit with Esri or mapping services. It was quite expensive to create these tools initially. And you had one provider that invested heavily in this R&D, and then you brought in the organization. AI is going to be everywhere. And I think my key takeaway, or what I impart on people I talk to, is, it is the water industry's time. This is an incredible opportunity for water to get engaged really early in this, to say, this is how models need to work for us. Because if we don't do that, we're going to get all of these models that are, a woman in a basement in some part of the world has just developed, and then is open sourced it, and it's in a platform that some other software company is put into their platform, and it perpetuates on. So what I would say is, this is coming, and we want to make sure we get involved early. And I would say pick a partner that will innovate with you. I think that's the critical approach, because if someone is coming saying, here's an AI tool that is a solution to a problem we need to solve, so that you need to find, that's not what you're looking for. I think you need someone who's going to say, listen, we're going to get your data ready. We're going to let you to collaborate in a more holistic, homogeneous environment. And then we start innovating on what type of tools we can use going forward, rather than a sort of fully baked thing that isn't baked.
Plus one and plus one. And then the only other thing I would add is that this stuff is incredibly exciting, and none of us really realize how much of it we already use every day. I mean, how many people in this room own a phone? Right? Okay, like that entire network is managed by AI that is deciding which route to send data down. And so AI's here, but we all collectively have to sort of lean into that and start to think about, okay, this is neat. How do I make it work for me? And how do I start down that process? The one thing I would add to these conversations is the one sort of caution or flag that I would add is, there are difficult issues around the utilization of data with AI and with data science in any scenario. There are questions around risk and ethics and data equity. And as these tools become more and more combined, the potential, attack area for, when one large language model is talking to another large language model, well, that's two, areas where you got to deal with the concerns and the risks and so on and so forth. And while I do think that there is an enormous amount of work that is happening to mitigate those risks and to help, to minimize some of those risks, it is incumbent upon leadership to understand those risks and to be proactive in thinking about how your respective organizations will address those, because those questions of equity and ethics and risks are ones that leaders have to deal with all the time. And so knowing that it's coming, knowing that it's ever pervasive, we might as well start thinking about it now, so that we can be prepared when we do have to make some of those decisions at the operational level.
I think that was really great note to sum things up on. That start now, it's coming, and it's already here. We can use this to our advantage. We need to be realistic about what it's going to take to be able to do that. Understand the investment that it's going to take to use the right systems in the right places to answer the right questions. And that really these are the questions that, what are we trying to ask? And then lastly, just the part about really needing to be cognizant of the responsibility that we bear to implement these things well. So with that, I first of all, of course, really appreciate you three as a panel. You can imagine how long our conversations went when we weren't constrained by an upcoming session. But I do absolutely want to leave some time for Q&A, because really this is sort of a once in a lifetime opportunity for you all in the audience to be able to ask these folks directly, given the partnership that we've been able to put together.
Hi, great panel. Thank you all so much for being here. I wanted to ask you whether AI might make some types of data science obsolete. For programmers, there's already AI tools out there that act as your co-pilot and generate code for you. You can easily imagine, not very far in the future, as a data scientist, just being able to talk to your data and say, hey, can you show me all the customers whose usage was over this many gallons per hour in the last week? Oh, that's great, thanks. Can you turn this into a report and send this to me every week? And you can imagine that in a world where more people are able to interact with their data this way, one's value as a data scientist is not that they know how to write a SQL query or know how to code some Python, but they know the right questions to ask. And they know what the limitations of the data are. And they're an expert on where the data comes from and how it's generated. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about how data consumers might do their work in the AI world.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is I think that's true always, right? I mean, assembly language programmers, there's not a lot of them left anymore, but they were real important a long time ago. And so the science underlying it, the computer science underlying it, is always going to change. I mean, I think Stanford actually started either last fall or this spring, a class on prompt engineering. Like that, like everyone, if you don't know what prompt engineering is how do you write a good prompt for an Gen AI engine to get you're asking the right questions so you get the right answers. Like those are all sorts of new opportunities, I think, that will come. And I think that, I'm going to date myself. I started my career teaching people how to log on to Windows 3.1, right? Like, I mean, one of my first jobs out of college was like, you need a username and a password. Here is how you type it in, because they just didn't have to do that in the world in which they were working, and, teaching people how to use word processors. We don't teach people that anymore. When kids come out of the college, we don't say, okay, now we're going to teach you how to use the systems that we use here at work, that not the sort of general ones. So, I think those skills will evolve over time. And I think the skills that we expect all of our staff to have, all of our employees to have, will also increase. And so making those investments now around, maybe this job over here is not a huge data-driven job right now, but we can see a path where that might happen. So how do we help people get familiar with it? Because sometimes it seems scary, but it's not. It's just a different way to look at information, and you're using that information anyway. So how do we make this easier for you to access that information, more timely information, and then utilize that information more effectively in the role that you're doing?
Yeah, I would just add, like, completely agree. I would add to it that I know it sort of feels that like generative AI is taking over the world, and it's going to be November and it's all over. Where there's so many jobs are gone. I think it's going to be so much slower than that. I think, and particularly in the water industry, so I would say like our generative AI tool, we nicknamed the tool Boots as a dog, but it needs to be house trained. And it's going to take a long time to be house trained. Yes, it'll sniff out the data. Yes, you can say, here's an email from a customer, respond to it. Why did well 42 go down today? Yes, you can ask those things, but to your point, we need better prompt engineering. But we also, prompt sophistication, which I think is where data scientists are going to go. But I also think that I've noticed, particularly in our line of work, is, we talk about data. It's, hey, how do we do this thing with these two sets of data? I think what's going to elevate is, should we do those things with those two sets of data, as opposed to saying, how do we actually do it? So maybe less practitioners and more strategic, I think it's going to become incredibly valuable, because I think in some ways everyone's going to be some element of a data engineer or a data scientist now. We're going to be a little bit more comfortable with it. But I think people who are very familiar with what goes on behind the scenes are going to be much more valuable, and I think you're going to be much more strategic in an organization.
Thanks for all your inputs on this. I'm curious about one thing that Lauren, you talked about towards the end, your takeaways, and was mentioned throughout. So we talked about the issue with privacy, obviously, of our data, risks of using generative AI for those types of things. We talked about the need for oversight for the outcomes of these products. But one thing that I'm personally struggling with is the ethical integrity of using those tools. So if you're a consultant, for example, Jeanna, and you're writing a report and you use ChatGPT for some of the content in that report, or you use ChatGPT for a presentation, is that something you cite? You have to be transparent about what ideas originally came from you as a consultant, knowing that your clients are paying for your mind, versus something that was generated using one of those tools. And I know it's much easier when we talk about code, because we're used to using things like Stack Overflow or just copying something from the internet and making some changes to it. But when it comes to creative and technical writing and brainstorming and things like that, how much of that we want to have some clear line and some citations for how much of that was your original thoughts and ideas, and how much of it was something that came from a machine?
Yeah, so this is actually something I think we're working through right now, implementing our AI usage policy. It's something that kind of came on fast, beginning of the year. All of a sudden, we have all our staff going to ChatGPT, right? So I think there are a few things that we're really carefully paying attention to right now. And one is don't put any of our client data into ChatGPT. Like, we can't do anything like that. So there are some hard restrictions around what we are putting into ChatGPT related to client information and client data. But at the same time, we're implementing internally our own, tools and looking at large language models to be able to pull from our own materials that we've already developed. So it's not necessarily that we're pulling, to create a deliverable or, report from, ChatGPT that's open to everything. We are using it, or will be using it as we're implementing it, to pull from our own materials, and our own reports. So it's still information that's been coming from us. But I think there's still that, that this is still something that we're trying to work through in terms of like, how do you cite that? How much do we use it? And we're trying to figure out that balance.
Hi, great panel. Thank you for all your insights. So I have a question that you talked about the training required for AI in general, large language models in particular. Now, and the operational knowledge from the last 40 years or so. One thing that I'd like your thoughts on is that as we face climate change, the signal in our data from climate change is going to be a lot smaller than our historical data sets. So how do you see AI and the tools that we're building helping us work with that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that's actually the crux of the question, is about using data from the last 40 years to predict what's going to go forward. I don't think that's going to be the way, and I think that's why it needs to be fine-tuned. I think when you get to to very like sub-process, there's a lot of same applicability. So for example, if a customer says, I think we were talking about this over the break, if someone says, why is my water cloudy? What we're training models to say, well, cloudy is turbidity, or why does it taste like this? It could be chlorine dosing. Like, they're the type of things we're training. But general things, general questions to predict over, with relation to climate change, I don't think they're going to be ready for that. I don't think they should be trained to that. I think there should be restrictions on it, personally. And I think we should be really defining use cases for actually how we do it. But it's a really, really good question. And I don't think we know the answer to it, but I think the only way we can get to an answer is if we engage with it, if we engage with the question. And I think that's the key takeaway for me is whether we like it or not, staff members, teammates are going to go to ChatGPT. They're going to put this in. And if we don't equip them with models that are specific to water, they could come back with, nonsensical answers, or could act on those things without our knowing. And like, that's the risk to agencies at the moment. We cannot just shut off the playground. We have to create a safe space for them to play.
I would add to that and say, I think, what you've just articulated is the tension between, sort of traditional approaches to predictive modeling and data science, and an approach to AI that is constantly learning. And so you're right. If we look at the last 40 years, it's not going to tell us anything. But if you take the data from the last 40 years, and as you are building models, you are setting parameters to over-index on the trends that we've seen in the last 5 years or the last 10 years, you may get closer. If you then combine that with, publicly available data about what's happening worldwide or what's happening in a given region, to help inform the training parameters that you're putting into that model, you may get closer. And so, look, data science and AI, for as good as they are not crystal balls, right? What they show you are trends and patterns and directions, and you want to get as close as possible to what those trends and patterns and predictions are. But it's not like I'm going to go ask ChatGPT, is my 16-year-old going to be in a good mood on Monday morning or not?
No.
We send this is a true story. We send the dog in the morning to say good morning to her. And if she yells at the dog, we all hide. If she says, oh, look, it's the puppy, we're all like, oh, yay, it's good day. Some things are still better offline. But I think, there are ways that we can tweak those models. And there are ways that as we continue to add data and leverage data, that is not narrow in its shape, we'll get closer. And we want to continue to do that within the parameters, making sure we're not exposing data and all of those kinds of things. This is going to be fun.
All right, well, everybody,
Thank you.
please give a big hand for everybody.